Welcome to Thalira Tales, where stories bloom in silence, carrying emotion, mystery, and hidden truth. Step in and let the tale unfold.
Less than 5 minutes after the divorce hearing began, my husband stood before the judge and said coldly, "I want half of the $4.3 million inheritance her father left her." The courtroom erupted in whispers. My mother gripped her handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. My sister lowered her head, barely daring to breathe. My husband turned to me, smiling as if everything was already in his hands. But when my lawyer placed an FBI-sealed USB drive on the table and said, "Please open it immediately," his smile vanished. "Thank you for being here. It genuinely means everything. Now tell me something. Where in the world are you watching this right now? City, country, time zone? Drop it below. You'd be surprised how far this room reaches." Note some elements of this story are fictional, added for storytelling purposes. Names and settings are coincidental. The message, however, is one I hope stays with you. Monday morning, June 2025, Pitkin County District Court, Aspen, Colorado. The courtroom was cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from air conditioning, the kind that settles in when everyone in the room is holding their breath. I sat at the defendant's table with my hands flat on the wood, my blazer the color of the deep end of a swimming pool, my face giving nothing away. 6 years of marriage had taught me one thing: David never expected I could be very, very still. He stood at the plaintiff's table in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. Custom fitted. Not a wrinkle. He looked like a man who had already decided how this story ended. He was wrong. Behind him, my mother Eleanor sat rigid in the gallery, spine straight, chin, lifted, the posture of a woman who believed composure was the same thing as dignity. Beside her, my sister Elena had her hands folded tight in her lap. She hadn't looked at me once since we walked in. The seat next to Elena was empty. Jack's seat. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody had to. Judge Patricia Holloway entered from the side door, and the room snapped to attention. She was a woman in her late 50s, silver hair pulled back with surgical precision, reading glasses already perched on her nose. She didn't waste a second. "Be seated." Her voice filled the room without effort. "We're here in the matter of Whitmore versus Whitmore. Counsel for the plaintiff, you may proceed." David's attorney, a sharp-featured man named Gerald Pitt, rose from his chair like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire career. He buttoned his jacket, he cleared his throat, and then he smiled at the judge the way men do when they think the outcome is already decided. "Your Honor," Pitt said, "the Whitfield Family Trust was established prior to the marriage of my client David Whitmore and the respondent Clara Whitmore. However, under Colorado's Equitable Distribution Statute, Revised Statute 1410-113, assets that have been actively contributed to, managed, and grown during the course of a marriage may be subject to division. My client personally advised, managed, and contributed to the development of this trust over the course of 6 years. We are therefore requesting full division of the trust's current appraised value, $4.3 million. The number landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. I watched the ripple move across the jury box, across the gallery. Judge Holloway didn't flinch. She set her pen down with deliberate care and looked at Pitt over the rim of her glasses. "Counselor," she said, "do you understand the legal burden you are assuming by classifying a pre-marital inherited asset as marital property?" Pitt didn't hesitate. "We are fully prepared to meet that burden, Your Honor. Mr. Whitmore was directly and personally involved in the trust's management and growth. The financial records will demonstrate." "I'll review those records when they are entered into evidence," Holloway said. "Not before." She turned to Marcus. "Counsel for the respondent." Marcus stood. Marcus Reed had been my attorney for 4 years and my friend for longer than that. He was the kind of man who spoke quietly because he never needed to raise his voice. He picked up a single sheet of paper, glanced at it briefly, and set it back down. "Your Honor," Marcus said, "the Whitfield Family Trust was funded entirely by Clara's father, Thomas Whitfield, before Clara and David Whitmore ever met. It was never commingled with marital funds. It was never used as collateral for shared debt. It was never jointly managed. Any involvement by Mr. Whitmore was incidental and unilateral. Under Colorado law, this trust is separate property. Full stop. Pitt was already on his feet. Your Honor. Sit down, Mr. Pitt, Holloway said. She didn't raise her voice either. Pitt sat. David turned from the plaintiff's table, just slightly, just enough to look at me. There it was, that smile. Small, patient. The smile of a man who believed he had already won because he believed he was the only one who had been playing. I gave him nothing. Not a blink. Not a breath. Marcus leaned down, his voice barely above a whisper. Ready. I've been ready, I said, for 4 years. Marcus straightened. He reached into his leather bag and placed a single item on the table, a USB drive sealed inside a red federal evidence envelope, stamped with the FBI chain of custody label. Case number printed across the front in clean black type. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, the respondent would like to submit Exhibit A for the court's review. We request permission to display the contents on the courtroom screen. Holloway looked at the envelope. Something shifted in her expression, barely perceptible, but it was there. Permission granted. The screen at the front of the courtroom flickered on. I watched David's eyes move to it. I watched the exact moment his jaw stopped working. The small, certain smile, the one he'd been wearing since he walked through the door, went still on his face for the first time all morning. There was a reason I had worn navy today, my father's favorite color. The first time I met David, he already knew my coffee order. I had thought it was charming. I had thought it meant he paid attention. It would take me 3 more years to understand what it actually meant. 3 minutes. That's how long it took for 47 transactions to dismantle 6 years of carefully constructed lies. The data filled the courtroom screen in clean, merciless columns: account numbers, transfer dates, dollar amounts, destination codes. No color, no drama, just numbers doing what numbers do best, telling the truth whether anyone wanted them to or not. Marcus stood at the center of the room with his hands loose at his sides. He didn't need notes for this part. Your Honor, he said, what the court is seeing on that screen represents 47 unauthorized wire transfers executed over a 5-year period. Each transfer originated from accounts directly linked to the Whitfield Family Trust. Each one terminated in offshore shell companies registered across 3 separate jurisdictions: the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, and a holding entity in Luxembourg. He paused. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit spent 18 months independently verifying every single transaction. The forensic audit was initially conducted by my client, Clara Whitmore, a licensed forensic accountant, and subsequently validated by federal investigators to eliminate any question of bias. That last part mattered. I had known it would come up. Gerald Pitt was already halfway to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Pitt's voice had lost some of its earlier polish. This evidence was not disclosed within the standard discovery window. The defense had no adequate time to. Judge Holloway didn't look up from the documents in front of her. It was disclosed to your office 11 months ago, Counselor. She turned a page. Sit down. Pitt sat. Across the room, David hadn't moved. He was staring at the screen, with the particular stillness of a man whose brain has stopped processing and started simply recording. I had seen that look on clients before, the moment a person realizes the numbers they thought were buried are standing in a courtroom under fluorescent lights. I had looked at those 47 transactions thousands of times over 4 years. I knew them the way you know a scar, every edge, every depth. But watching David see them for the first time, that was something I hadn't prepared myself for. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who had just realized the floor had been gone for a long time, and he was only now beginning to fall. Behind him, my mother Eleanor sat with her handbag pressed against her ribs, knuckles pale against the leather. Elena stared at the screen. Her face had gone the color of old paper. The empty seat beside her stayed empty. Marcus advanced to the next slide. A web of connected accounts spread across the screen lines running from the Whitfield Trust outward, like roots, branching into numbered entities, each one a dead end designed to make money disappear. Your Honor, Marcus continued, these are not accounting errors. These are not clerical oversights. The pattern of transfers, the timing, the amounts, the deliberate use of threshold structuring to avoid federal reporting requirements demonstrates a coordinated and sustained effort to drain the Whitfield Trust of its assets over time. Pitt tried again. Objection. Counsel is characterizing evidence before it has been overruled. Holloway's pen moved across the page without stopping. Continue, Mr. Reed. David leaned toward his attorney. I couldn't hear what he said, but I could read the shape of it short. Urgent, the kind of words a person uses when they need someone to fix something that cannot be fixed. Pitt responded in a low voice without looking at him. David leaned back. He pressed 2 fingers to his mouth. And for the first time since we had walked into this courtroom, he looked at me, really looked at me like he was trying to calculate how much I actually knew. All of it, I thought. I know all of it. Judge Holloway set down her pen. She took off her reading glasses. She looked at David with the measured, unhurried expression of someone who has spent 30 years on the bench and has learned that patience is not the same thing as kindness. Mr. Whitmore, she said, it appears you did not manage the Whitfield family trust. She let that settle for exactly 1 second. You drained it, systematically. David opened his mouth. I'd advise you not to respond without consulting your attorney, Holloway added. Not a suggestion, a warning. Pitt put a hand on David's arm. David closed his mouth. Marcus gathered the next set of documents, deliberate, unhurried, and turned back to the judge. Your Honor, the financial records represent only the first layer of what the court needs to understand. The 47 transfers didn't happen in isolation. They were part of something larger, something that was set in motion long before any of us were sitting in this room. He paused. To understand why we are here today, the court needs to hear what happened on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2023. The room went very quiet. David's jaw tightened. He turned sharply toward his attorney, and whatever he said this time, Pitt had no answer for it. The older man just gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was too late to stop this. It had been too late for a long time. Marcus looked at me briefly, one quick glance steady as a compass needle, and then he began. The drive up to our villa from the courthouse, that was how Marcus framed it to Judge Holloway. Let me take you back to where it started, Your Honor. Back to the mountain. Back to the night everything stopped being a suspicion and became a fact. December 24th, 2023. Aspen, Colorado. 9:45 in the evening. The snow outside was the kind that falls slowly, deliberately, like it has nowhere else to be. Inside the villa smelled of pine and the cedar candles David had ordered from a boutique in Denver. Downstairs, a private chef was plating the last course of our anniversary dinner, 6 years, he had said that morning, and kissed me on the forehead like a man who meant it. I had come upstairs to get his gift from my office. That was the story. The truth was simpler and older than that. I am a forensic accountant. I find what people try to hide for a living. And for the past 8 months, I had been finding things in our own house that I couldn't explain. Small inconsistencies, account discrepancies, a pattern of transfers that looked accidental until you laid them end to end and saw the shape they made. I had said nothing. I had watched. And every evening before bed, I checked the security feed from the hallway cameras, a habit so automatic it had become as unremarkable as locking the front door. Our villa had a full home security system. Cameras in the entryway, the kitchen, the main hallway on the second floor. Standard coverage for a property at this price point. It was in the insurance documentation. It was in the home inspection report David had signed when we bought the place. The hallway camera on the second floor covered the corridor outside our bedroom. The bedroom door was ajar. I opened my laptop, pulled up the live feed, and saw them. David and my sister Elena. They were standing just inside the bedroom doorway, close enough that their voices were barely above a whisper, but the camera's audio pickup was good, and the hallway was quiet. And I heard every word with the kind of clarity you only get when the world goes completely still. I had wondered in the back of my mind how many times they had stood exactly like that in exactly that spot. The answer was obvious in the way they moved around each other, no hesitation, no awkward angles. This was not a first conversation. This was not even close. David glanced toward the staircase. Satisfied. He looked back at Elena. After tonight, we don't have to pretend anymore. His voice was low, unhurried, the voice of a man running a meeting, not a man standing in his wife's house on their wedding anniversary. She signs the authorization, Jack moves everything before 11, and by morning, the trust is gone. Elena shifted her weight. You're sure she'll sign? Clara isn't stupid, David? She trusts me. He said it the way you state a fact about weather. 6 years, and I've never given her a reason not to. A brief pause. Then quieter. The mountains are beautiful this time of year. Accidents happen up here, Elena. This time, we make sure. The room on my screen went very still. So did I. Elena was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful, not horrified, just calculating. How long after? Long enough to look natural. Another pause. And the authorization, Elena asked. Downstairs on the table, David said. Between the dessert plates and the wine. She'll think it's a property renewal form. She signs things I put in front of her. He almost smiled. She always has. I sat without moving and counted. 43 seconds. That was the distance between understanding what I was hearing and being able to pick up my phone. I had run scenarios for months. I had built spreadsheets, cross-referenced dates, traced account numbers through 3 layers of shell entities. I had been prepared for financial fraud. I had been prepared for betrayal. I had even been prepared for the authorization form. Marcus and I had discussed it 2 weeks earlier, and I had known something was coming. I had not been prepared for long enough to look natural. My hands were steady. That surprised me even then. I dialed Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. Clara. Not a question. He had been waiting. It's tonight. My voice came out even and quiet, which was not how I felt, but was the only version of myself I could afford right now. The authorization, the transfer, all of it. Are we ready? Ryan confirmed his position 20 minutes ago. Marcus Reed, my attorney. The man who had spent 4 years building this case alongside me spoke with the calm of someone who had also been waiting a long time for this particular phone call. Everything is in place. Miller has 2 units on standby at the base of the mountain. Don't let them see your face until you're ready. Understood. Clara. A brief hesitation, the only one he allowed himself. You don't have to go back down there. Yes, I do, I said. If I don't, they move the timeline and we lose Jack's transfer window. I paused. And I need to see his face when he puts that paper in front of me. Marcus said nothing for a moment. 2 hours, I said. I just need 2 hours. I'll be watching the feed, he said. The whole time. I ended the call, closed the laptop. The mirror above my desk gave me back my own reflection hair, still neat earrings, still straight anniversary dress, still exactly right. I studied the woman looking back at me the way I study a balance sheet, looking for anything out of place, anything that would give me away. I found nothing. I adjusted one strand of hair. I set my expression warm, relaxed, a woman coming back downstairs with her husband's gift, and nothing heavier than gratitude on her mind. Then I looked at myself one more time and thought, 6 years. He spent 6 years building this. And the most important performance of my entire life fits inside the next 2 hours. I picked up the gift box from my desk. I opened the office door. And I walked back toward the sound of the music playing downstairs, toward the candlelight and the wine and the man who had just told my sister that accidents happen in the mountains. The living room looked exactly like a photograph of happiness. Fireplace burning low and steady. 2 bottles of champagne, one open, one waiting. The dining table cleared except for the dessert plates and a cluster of white candles burning down to their last quarter-inch. Someone had put on Sinatra. David had thought of everything. He always thought of everything. That was the problem. Eleanor sat in the armchair closest to the fire, a glass of Bordeaux balanced on her knee, her posture the kind you develop after decades of deciding that elegance is the same as control. She didn't look up when I came downstairs. She rarely did. Jack Calloway stood near the window with his back to the room phone in one hand, drink in the other. My brother-in-law, Elena's husband, senior VP at a private wealth management firm in New York. On paper, he was the most legitimate person in the room. On paper. Elena appeared at the top of the stairs a few minutes after I did. Her hair had been adjusted, a strand that had been loose was now pinned back. She descended like nothing had happened, which was, I had to admit, something she was very good at. David was already moving toward me, 2 champagne flutes in hand, his smile doing exactly what it was designed to do. "There you are," he said, and pressed a glass into my hand like punctuation. "Here I am," I said. He guided me toward the table. A small gift box sat at my place, setting white, tied with a thin gold ribbon. He watched me pick it up with the expression of a man presenting something precious. "Open it," he said. Inside a fountain pen, brushed gold, the kind that costs more than most people's monthly rent. Beautiful, deliberate. And beneath it, folded into quarters and tucked against the velvet lining like an afterthought, a document. I lifted it out. David's hand came to rest on my shoulder, warm and steady. "Just a year-end trust restructuring, sweetheart. Marcus actually recommended it a few months back. We need your signature tonight to hit the filing deadline." He kept his voice light. Anniversary light. Nothing to worry about light. I looked at the paper. 2 pages. Dense legal language, the kind designed to make a person's eyes slide off the page. Whitfield Family Trust. Transfer of administrative authority. A signature line at the bottom with my name pre-printed beneath it. Tonight, I let a small wrinkle of confusion onto my face, just enough. On our anniversary. I know. He squeezed my shoulder. "I'm sorry about the timing. It really can't wait past midnight." Eleanor set down her wine glass. "Don't make it into something it isn't, Clara." Her voice had the particular flatness of a woman who has long since stopped pretending to like me. "It's paperwork. Sign it and have your champagne." "Your mother's right," Jack said, turning from the window just enough to join the conversation without fully committing to it. He slid his phone into his jacket pocket. "Standard authorization procedure. I processed 3 similar ones this week alone. 15 minutes of your time, then it's done." I looked from David to Eleanor to Jack. 3 people in a room, each one holding a different piece of the same story, each one watching me with the patient, careful attention of people waiting for something they've already decided is going to happen. "Of course," I said. "Let me read through it first." David exhaled. Just slightly. Just enough. That was the moment I had been waiting for. Not the document, not the pen, but that single quiet exhale. The relief of a man who had been holding his breath without realizing I was counting it. I was halfway through the first page when Sarah came in from the kitchen. Sarah Pemberton had kept this house running for 11 years before David and I ever moved in. She was 61, unhurried, with the kind of face that had long since stopped revealing what she was thinking. To everyone in that room, she was invisible in the way that good staff becomes invisible, present, efficient, unremarkable. She carried a tea tray to the side table and began setting it out with her usual quiet economy of motion. Then she leaned forward to place the last cup, and in that brief angled moment, she looked directly at me. Not a glance, a look, specific and deliberate. Then her eyes moved upward to the antique pendulum clock mounted above the mantel. The one that had been in the house since before either of us arrived. The one with the small brass fitting on the back that had been there, as far as David knew, since the day it was installed. The red indicator light on that fitting blinked 3 times. Slow, measured. I looked back at my document. Sarah straightened, collected her empty tray, and left the room without a word. She and I had developed that signal 8 months ago when we first understood what we were dealing with. 3 blinks meant the same thing it had always meant: recording. Everything is going to the server. You are not alone in this room. My phone vibrated once in my clutch, a single pulse, the setting I used only for this number. I didn't take it out. I already knew what it said. We had rehearsed the timing a dozen times. Unknown number, Ryan Cole, FBI Financial Crimes. The message would read J online. Transfer window open. 90 minutes. Which meant Jack had already initiated the scheduled transfer sequence from somewhere in this room, most likely from the phone he'd just put away. Which meant the window was real and the clock was running. I set the document down on the table, smoothed it flat, and looked up at David. I need my reading glasses, I said. I left them in the study. He blinked. I can get them. No. I was already standing. Stay, I'll be 2 minutes. He settled back, perfectly comfortable, perfectly certain. I walked toward the staircase at exactly the pace of a woman who needed her reading glasses and nothing else. And I did not let my hands shake until I was past the landing and out of his line of sight. They weren't shaking because I was afraid. They were shaking because I had been in that room for 11 minutes, watching 3 people coordinate a theft, and a worse thing than a theft. And the only move available to me was to go upstairs for 2 minutes and come back down and keep performing. I pressed my back against the wall at the top of the stairs and took one breath. One was all I allowed. Then I pulled out my phone and typed 4 words to Marcus: authorization unsigned, transfer running. His reply came in under 10 seconds. Good, stay in position. I put the phone away. I straightened my dress, and I went back downstairs to sign nothing. I made it to the top of the stairs before I let myself breathe again. The study door closed behind me. I didn't turn on the overhead light, just the small lamp on the desk enough to see by. Not enough to cast shadows through the gap under the door. Downstairs I could hear Jack refilling his glass, Eleanor saying something to Elena in a low, flat voice. The particular quiet of people waiting for an outcome they believe is already secured. I dialed Marcus. He picked up before the second ring. Talk to me. The authorization is on the table, I said. He wrapped it inside a gift box. Fountain pen on top, document underneath. Told me it was a year-end restructuring and that you recommended it. A brief silence. He used my name. He used your name. Noted. Marcus's voice didn't change, but I knew him well enough to hear what was underneath it. Jack connected to the foreign exchange routing system approximately 9 minutes ago. Ryan has visual confirmation from the adjacent property. Everything going through that network tonight is being captured in real time. The warrant still holds federal surveillance order active since June 23rd. Anything recorded tonight is fully admissible. Every transfer Jack initiates, every communication in or out of that house, it goes directly to a secure FBI server. He paused. I told you Thomas was 30 minutes out. He made better time than expected. Clara, he's closer. I was about to respond when I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, coming from the back of the house, the service entrance off the kitchen, the door that faced the tree line rather than the road. The door David never used because it wasn't the kind of entrance a man like David used. I have to go, I said. Go, Marcus said. I'll be on the line. I slipped out of the study and took the back staircase, the narrow one the staff used tucked behind the pantry wall. It brought me out beside the kitchen, out of the sightline of the living room. I opened the back door. The cold came in first. Then the light from the doorway fell across him, and I stood there for a moment that had no measurable length, because the man standing in the snow was someone I had spent 2 years learning to think of as gone. Thomas Whitfield was 64 years old and looked like he had earned every year of it. His coat was heavy wool, dark green, dusted with snow across the shoulders. His hair had gone fully silver in my memory. It had been mostly dark-touched at the temples. He was thinner than I remembered. His eyes were the same. He was carrying a leather briefcase. Worn at the corners, the kind that has been used for actual work rather than appearance. He had parked a quarter-mile down the access road and walked through the trees to avoid the front drive. I found this out later. At the time, all I could process was that he was standing in my doorway, and he was alive. Dad. The word came out smaller than I intended. He stepped inside and put one hand on my shoulder, firm, steady, the way you hold on to something you were afraid you'd never get back. "I'm sorry it took this long," he said. I pulled the door shut behind him, keeping my voice low. "They told me you were dead. There was a memorial. Mom spoke at it." "I know." He set the briefcase on the kitchen counter without letting go of my shoulder. "Your mother is very good at arranging things on short notice. Jack staged the accident." It wasn't a question. Marcus had walked me through the mechanics of it months ago, a mountain road outside Telluride black ice that wasn't entirely black ice, a guardrail that had been partially unbolted 3 days before. He needed me gone before I could execute the new will, Thomas said. The accident put me in a hospital in Grand Junction for 6 weeks. By the time I recovered enough to know my own name reliably, Eleanor had filed the missing persons declaration and liquidated the Denver property. Vivian Hart. My estate attorney had a standing arrangement. A property outside Durango registered under a corporate name she'd held since 1987. I lived there. Cash only. No digital footprint. Marcus knew the address. Sarah knew the address. Nobody else did. He paused. A man with a documented traumatic brain injury claiming his wife arranged his accident to steal his estate. No physical evidence at that point. No documentation. You tell me which judge takes that case seriously. So you waited. Every day I waited was a day I didn't want to wait. But Marcus needed a complete picture financials chain of custody, the full scope of what Jack had been running through those accounts. And you needed to be safe first. He met my eyes directly. I wasn't coming back until I could make sure coming back didn't put you in more danger than you were already in. How long have you been in contact with Marcus? Since June of 2021. He found me through Sarah. Of course. Sarah, who had worked in this house before David and I arrived, who had installed that clock fitting with a steadiness that suggested she had done careful things before, who had looked at me across a tea tray tonight with the eyes of a woman keeping a very long promise. Thomas lifted the briefcase onto the kitchen table and unlatched it. Inside, a bound stack of documents separated by colored tabs. The original Whitfield family trust instrument. Property deeds. A chain of title record for every asset Eleanor had moved in the 2 years following Thomas's disappearance. Bank records with handwritten annotations in Thomas's careful, precise hand. And at the bottom, a sealed envelope. No label. Just a single line of Thomas's handwriting across the front for Clara. "When it's time." "Everything Eleanor concealed is in here," Thomas said. "Everything Marcus needs to complete the federal filing." He touched the envelope briefly. "And there is one more thing, something I found 2 months ago. It changes what you think you know about this family, Clara. About Elena. About why your mother did what she did." I looked at the envelope. My name in my father's handwriting, careful, unhurried, the way he signed birthday cards when I was young. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because from somewhere below us, through the floor and the walls and the music that was still playing in the living room, David's voice drifted up the staircase. Sweetheart. Warm. Patient. The voice of a man who had no idea the back door had just opened. "The champagne's getting warm." Thomas and I looked at each other across the kitchen table. 2 hours, I said quietly. Not to him, to myself. Reminding myself of the only number that mattered right now. "I'll be here," Thomas said. "I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." I closed the briefcase, left the envelope where it was, and I straightened my shoulders, put warmth back into my face, and walked toward the sound of my husband's voice. I held up one finger toward my father and turned to face the doorway. "Still looking," I called up toward the staircase. "The left drawer is a disaster. Give me 1 more minute." David's footsteps paused on the stairs. A beat of silence, the kind where a person decides whether to push or wait. Then, take your time. His voice had the texture of a man who could afford to be patient because he believed the outcome was already settled. The footsteps retreated. I turned back to the kitchen table. The envelope was already open in my hands. I had broken the seal the moment I heard his feet stop moving, buying myself seconds while I still had them. Inside was a single folded sheet, a laboratory report header, a case reference number, two DNA profiles laid out in parallel columns, clean and precise, the way scientific documents always are. The kind of language that has no interest in how you feel about what it's telling you. I read it once. Then I read it again. Elena isn't your biological daughter, I said. My voice came out flat, which was the only honest register available to me at that moment. My father stood across the table with his hands resting on the leather of the briefcase, watching me the way a person watches someone absorb something that cannot be taken back once it lands. Her biological father is Richard Harmon, he said, Eleanor's business partner in 1994. They ran a real estate development firm together in Phoenix for about 4 years before your mother and I married. The partnership dissolved when Eleanor moved to Denver. Harmon stayed in Arizona. He paused. I suspected for years. Elena has his jaw, his coloring. I never said anything because I had no proof, and because I told myself it didn't change who she was to me. A beat. Then I went into hiding, and I had nothing but time, and Sarah was able to retrieve a sample from the house. What kind of sample? A hairbrush from Elena's old bathroom, the one on the 3rd floor she stopped using 2 years ago. Sarah sent it through a private laboratory in Denver under a reference name. He glanced at the report. It took 8 weeks. The result was not close. I set the document on the table. Richard Harmon, a name I had heard exactly once in passing. Years ago, Eleanor mentioning a former colleague with the practiced indifference of someone who had decided long ago to classify a person as irrelevant. I had filed it away the way you file away the details of a life that doesn't belong to you. Does Elena know? I asked. No. Thomas said it without hesitation. And your mother will never tell her voluntarily. To Eleanor, this information is a liability, not a truth. It always has been. But Jack knows. Jack found out approximately 2 years ago. We believe he accessed Eleanor's personal files through the joint account infrastructure he set up for her, the same network he uses for the offshore transfers. He's been using it as leverage ever since. Thomas's voice carried the particular weight of a man who has had a long time to think about people's worst decisions. Jack told Eleanor that if she didn't cooperate fully with David's plan, didn't actively support pressuring you into signing, didn't provide access to certain family financial records, he would tell Eleanor everything. I pulled out the chair beside the table and sat down. Not because I needed to, because I needed 30 seconds to let the picture finish assembling itself. Eleanor had never liked me. I had spent years trying to understand it in personal terms. The wrong daughter, the wrong temperament. Not soft enough, not obedient enough, never quite what she wanted a daughter to be. I had cataloged her coldness and filed it under that simply who she is and moved on. But it had never been about me. Elena had no legal claim to the Whitfield family trust, not a dollar of it. Because Thomas Whitfield was not her father, and the trust had been established in Thomas's name for Thomas's bloodline, with provisions that were specific and documented and enforceable. Elena could not inherit from a man she was not related to. Not without a legal challenge that would require exposing exactly what Eleanor had spent 30 years concealing. David couldn't take the trust through Elena. There was nothing to take. But I was Thomas Whitfield's daughter, the only one, which made me the only door. She never protected Elena, I said. The words arranged themselves without effort because they were simply true. Every decision she made, cooperating with Jack, pressuring me to sign, letting David run this entire operation through our marriage, none of it was about protecting Elena. It was about protecting the secret. Your mother has been protecting that secret since before you were born, Thomas said. Elena is collateral. You were the mechanism, and I was the obstacle that needed to be removed. The kitchen was quiet. Upstairs, the house made the small sounds that old houses make in winter, settling wood, the faint tick of a heating system. Somewhere in the living room, the music had changed to something slower. I folded the DNA report and placed it inside my blazer pocket, flat against my chest, next to the phone with Ryan's last message still on the screen. When this is over, I said, Elena is going to find out. Yes, Thomas said. She is. She won't take it well. No, she won't. He looked at me directly. But that is not your responsibility to manage tonight. The footsteps were back on the stairs. Closer this time and moving with more purpose, David had run out of patience, which meant his confidence was beginning to develop its first crack. Clara. His voice was still warm, still controlled, but there was something underneath it now. A tightening. Everything all right up there? Thomas looked at the kitchen door. Then at me. I stood up, pressed my hand over his for 1 second, long enough to feel the steadiness in it, the same steadiness I had been trying to locate in myself for the past 20 minutes. Stay here, I said quietly. Don't come out until I call you. Not for any reason. I'll be here, he said. The same words he had used upstairs with the same weight behind them. A promise that meant something different now than it would have 2 hours ago, because now I knew exactly how long he had been keeping it. I stepped out of the kitchen. The hallway was dim lit only by the spillover from the living room. David was standing at the base of the main staircase, one hand on the newel post, looking up. He turned when he heard my footsteps. Found them, I said, and held up my reading glasses, the ones I had actually retrieved from the study on my way down. The detail mattered. The details always mattered. He studied my face for a fraction of a second longer than he should have. I held his gaze and let him find nothing. Good, he said. He smiled and extended his hand toward the living room. Then let's finish what we started. I smiled back, the envelope pressed flat and silent against my ribs, and I walked with him into the room where my mother and my sister and the man running an illegal wire transfer were waiting for me to pick up a pen. David had gone ahead. He had held the living room doorway open for me, then stepped through first when I paused and said, I needed a moment just getting my bearings. The back hallway is darker than I remembered. He had accepted that the way he accepted most things I said without question, because he had never had a reason to question me, and because tonight of all nights he needed everything to feel frictionless. The living room swallowed him. The door swung halfway closed behind him. And from the kitchen on my left, the main kitchen, not the back one where my father was sitting with a closed briefcase and 30 years of patience voices. I did not move toward them. I pressed myself into the angle where the hallway turned just outside the kitchen doorway, and I listened. Jack's voice first. Low, efficient. The voice of a man running a transaction, rather than having a conversation. Transfer window opens at 10:30. By 11, everything clears to Geneva. She needs to sign within the next 45 minutes. A pause. The sound of a phone screen being tapped. The routing is clean, Jack continued. 3 intermediary accounts before it hits the Geneva shell. By the time anyone flags it, it's already been split into 4 tranches and rerouted through Luxembourg. Untraceable inside 72 hours. Eleanor's voice. She'll sign. David knows how to manage her. I had heard my mother say a great many things over the years that I had filed away and declined to examine too closely. That one landed differently. He knows how to manage her. Said the way you discuss a system that has been stress-tested and found reliable. And my account? Jack asked. 700,000, as agreed. After the transfer clears, not before. I'll need confirmation before midnight. You'll have it. A brief silence. Stop treating me like I haven't held up my end of this, Jack. I've done everything you asked. Jack made a sound that was not quite agreement. You've done what was necessary to protect yourself. That's not the same thing. Eleanor didn't respond to that. Smart woman, I thought. There was no good answer to it because he was right. Everything Eleanor had done in the past 2 years had been in service of one objective: keeping the secret that Jack had found and turned into a leash, not protecting Elena, not building anything, just surviving the leverage. "One more thing," Jack said. "Thomas, you're certain he's not a factor?" The kitchen went very quiet. I pressed my shoulder blades flat against the wall and did not breathe. "Thomas has not been a factor for 2 years," Eleanor said. Her voice had dropped half a register, not softer but more contained, the way people speak when they are being careful with their words. "Keep it that way." She did not say since he died. She did not say since the accident. She said has not been a factor. Present tense framing applied to a past condition. My mother knew my father was alive. I had suspected it. Marcus had theorized it, that Eleanor's behavior in the aftermath of the accident had been too controlled, too efficient, too immediately useful to her own interests to belong to a woman in genuine grief. But hearing it stated as a management directive in a kitchen conversation on Christmas Eve settled the question with a finality that left no room for alternative interpretation. She had known. For 2 years she had known, and she had said nothing, and she had stood at a memorial service and accepted condolences from people who genuinely believed her husband was dead. My hand found the wall beside me and pressed flat against it. She talks about it the way people talk about inconvenient weather, I thought. My father's absence from my life, from 2 years of holidays and phone calls and moments I had spent learning to carry the weight of, had been to my mother a matter of logistics, a variable managed and set aside. I heard Jack's chair shift, the sound of him standing. 45 minutes, he said. "I'll be watching the confirmation screen." "Then go watch it," Eleanor said, "and let David do his job." Footsteps. Jack moving toward the hallway. I stepped back around the corner, silent, and kept walking toward the living room as though I had come from the direction of the study stairs. By the time Jack emerged from the kitchen doorway, I was already 3 paces past it, moving with the unhurried purpose of a woman who had been searching for her reading glasses and found them. He glanced at me. I gave him a small, distracted smile, the one that says, "I'm not paying attention to you," and he looked away. The living room was warm and overlit, and smelled of the candles that were now burning low. Elena had moved to the armchair by the window. The authorization form was still on the coffee table, exactly where David had left it. He was standing beside the bar cart, refreshing 2 glasses, his back to the room, and he turned when he heard me come in, and the relief that moved across his face lasted just long enough to confirm that those 45 minutes mattered more to him than he had let show. "There you are." He smiled and crossed the room with both glasses. "I was about to send a search party. Sorry." I took the champagne. "The back hallway is darker than I remembered." I got turned around for a second. He studied my face with the trained attention of someone who has spent years watching for cracks in a particular surface. I met his eyes and let him find exactly what I wanted him to find. A wife who had been looking for her reading glasses in a dark hallway, slightly flustered, slightly apologetic, ready to sit down and finish the evening. "Come sit," he said, and his hand found the small of my back. I sat. The authorization form was 6 inches from my right hand. The pen, the beautiful, expensive pen from the gift box, was resting across it at a precise diagonal, positioned like a stage prop, because that was exactly what it was. Eleanor came in from the kitchen and resumed her seat without looking at me. Jack settled near the window again, phone face down on the armrest, one eye on the clock above the mantel. The antique clock. Sarah's clock. 3 blinks, steady and silent, that no one in this room was paying attention to except me. Elena sat with her hands folded. She didn't look at David. David didn't look at her. They had the practiced non-acknowledgement of 2 people who had spent considerable time learning to be invisible to each other in shared spaces. 4 people. 1 room. 1 document on a table. All of them watching me with the patience of people who believed the last piece of the evening was about to fall into place. I picked up my champagne glass and took a slow sip, They've been waiting for me to pick up that pen, I thought. What they don't know is that I've been waiting 4 years for them to be sitting exactly where they're sitting right now. The clock above the mantel ticked. Jack's phone screen glowed once against the armrest and went dark. David leaned forward slightly and nudged the pen a half-inch closer to my hand. "Whenever you're ready, sweetheart," he said. I looked at the document. I looked at the pen. I looked up at him and smiled like a woman who was almost ready. 9:15. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock above the mantel. Sarah's clock. With its steady brass pendulum and its small secret, and because every minute from that point forward had a weight to it that I had been anticipating for 4 years. Jack came back from the hallway with his phone in his hand and the particular expression of a man whose patience has a hard edge beneath it. "We need the signature now, Clara." He didn't sit. He stood near the end of the coffee table, which placed him between me and the door in a way that I doubted was accidental. 45 minutes. After that, the transfer window closes and we restructure the entire timeline. I looked up from the document with the measured calm of someone who is reading carefully and finds the interruption mildly irritating. "I'm almost through the second page." "You've been on the second page for 12 minutes. "It's a complex document, Jack." He opened his mouth, closed it, set his phone face up on the armrest so he could watch the screen without looking like he was watching the screen. Eleanor stood up. She crossed the room with the deliberate economy of a woman who has decided that a certain performance is no longer worth the energy it requires. The warmth she had been wearing all evening, that careful social warmth, the kind that costs nothing and means less, was gone. What replaced it was something I recognized from childhood. The face she used when she had calculated that directness was more efficient than persuasion. "Stop stalling," she said. "This is for the family." "I'm not stalling. I'm reading." I turned another page. "This is a $4.3 million instrument, Mom. I'd like to understand what I'm signing." "You understand perfectly well what you're signing. Then it won't hurt to give me 5 more minutes." She looked at David. The look said, "Handle this." David moved. He came around the back of the sofa and sat beside me close the way a husband sits when he wants the proximity to do work that words can't do as efficiently. His hand found my knee. "Warm, practiced. Every clause in that document protects you," he said. His voice was the one I had married, steady, reasonable, the voice of a man who had never given me a reason not to trust him. I put it together with the estate attorney myself. "It's a restructuring for tax efficiency, nothing more." A brief pause. "I give you my word, Clara." I looked at him. I let myself hold his gaze for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to appear to be weighing it, short enough not to appear suspicious. "Your word," I said. "My word." 6 years, I thought. He's been giving me his word for 6 years, and I have spent the last 4 of them documenting exactly what it's worth. I looked back at the document. Sarah came in from the kitchen. She moved the way she always moved, unhurried, precise, carrying the tea tray with the quiet competence of someone who has been doing this particular job long enough that the room barely registers her presence. She set the tray on the side table, arranged the cups, and when she leaned forward to place the last one near my end of the sofa, her wrist passed close to mine, and for one brief, deliberate moment, she pressed 2 fingers against the inside of my wrist. Not a touch. A signal. I looked up at the clock. The red indicator light blinked 3 times. Slow. Measured. The same rhythm it had used in Task 4. The same rhythm we had agreed on 8 months ago when Sarah and I had worked out the details of what we were building and what we would need to prove it. Recording. Everything is going to the server. You are not alone in this room. My phone pulsed once in my blazer pocket, a single vibration, the setting I used only for one number. I didn't reach for it. I already knew. Ryan's message would be 4 words or fewer because Ryan Cole communicated the way good agents do, with the minimum necessary language and no room for misinterpretation. All parties captured. 4 people in this room speaking freely on record under a federal surveillance order that had been active for 18 months. Every word Jack had said about the transfer window. Every word Eleanor had said about managing me. Every word David had said about his word. All of it going to a secure server in Denver, time-stamped chain of custody intact, admissible in a federal court proceeding. I picked up the pen. The room responded immediately, a collective shift barely perceptible, the way a room full of people exhales when something they've been waiting for finally begins to happen. Jack's hand moved to his phone. Eleanor's chin lifted. David's hand tightened slightly on my knee. I positioned the pen above the signature line. Then I stopped. Actually, I set the pen down against the document, not away from it. Against it, the gesture of someone pausing rather than refusing. There's one clause I need Marcus to clarify. Section 4, Paragraph 3. The language around administrative transfer authority is broader than I expected. I looked up at David. It'll take 10 minutes. It's just procedure. The shift in the room was immediate and specific. David's expression didn't break, but something in it reorganized. The smile stayed, but the ease behind it didn't. Jack looked at his phone, then at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at David with an expression I had not seen on her face before the first draft of something that was not quite confidence. Your attorney doesn't need to be involved in a routine filing, Eleanor said. This is a $4.3 million instrument, I said. You said so yourself? I said it's routine. Then Marcus will confirm that in 10 minutes and I'll sign. Silence. Jack checked the time. 9:18. He ran a calculation that I could see moving behind his eyes. 42 minutes, remaining 10 minutes for Marcus, 32 left for the transfer to process. Tight. Possible. The math still worked and he knew it. Fine, Jack said. The word came out clipped. 10 minutes. I reached for my phone with the deliberate calm of a woman making a routine call to her attorney. David watched my hand. Eleanor watched my face. Jack watched the clock. None of them were watching Elena. She had been sitting in the armchair by the window for the past 40 minutes, hands folded, contributing nothing to the conversation. The perfect still point in a room full of moving pieces. I had noticed her the way you notice furniture present accounted for not requiring active attention. But when I glanced across the room to find a neutral point to rest my eyes while I dialed, I saw her face. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Jack. Not the way a wife looks at her husband. The way a person looks at someone they have just finished making a private calculation about. Something had shifted in Elena's expression in the last 3 minutes. Something quiet and unannounced that had the texture of a decision being made rather than a reaction being had. I did not know what she had decided. I did not know what had triggered it. What I knew and noted with the part of my mind that never fully stopped cataloging was that Elena had been silent all evening by design, and she was now sitting up straighter in her chair. David checked his watch. 9:18. Jack's screen lit up and went dark. Eleanor looked at David. David looked at me. And Elena stood up. I need to say something, she said. The room went very still. Whatever happens next, I thought wasn't in anyone's plan, including mine. I need to know you're still here before I tell you what she said next. Drop "I'm here" in the comments, because what Elena does in the next moment is the one thing David never planned for. And it unravels everything. This story contains fictional elements woven in for clarity and depth. If you'd prefer to step away now, this is a good place to do it. Still here? Good. Keep listening. The room held its breath. Elena was standing in the center of it, between the coffee table and the window, in the narrow geography between where I was sitting and where Jack had been standing, and every person in that room had stopped, moving in the particular way people stop when they sense that something has just changed and they don't yet know the shape of it. She was looking directly at me. I had known Elena my entire life. I knew the specific texture of her performances, the ones she gave for rooms for approval for effect. This was not that. Her chin was up, and her hands were still, and what was on her face was the expression of someone who had made a calculation and decided to act before the window closed. She had watched all evening. She had watched David work, the room, watched Jack monitor his phone, watched Eleanor perform the role of supportive family while quietly coordinating a transfer that would leave everyone with their agreed-upon share. And somewhere in the last 40 minutes, Elena had done the arithmetic and arrived at a number she didn't like. Her share was not in the plan. "You deserve to know the truth before you sign anything," she said. Her voice was steady. She had rehearsed this or something like it. "I'm pregnant. It's David's." The fireplace crackled. Sinatra kept playing from the speaker on the shelf some song about the way you look tonight, which under any other circumstances would have been almost funny. Eleanor's reaction was instantaneous and unmistakable. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted, and something moved across her face that I had rarely seen there directed at anything involving me. Hope. Raw, immediate, the hope of a woman who had just been handed a narrative that served her perfectly, a grandchild, a claim, a reason for everything to have been worth it. David went pale, not the pale of a man who has been caught, the pale of a man watching someone detonate a device he didn't know was in the room. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved to Elena with an expression I could only describe as controlled fury wrapped in something that looked for just a moment almost like fear. She had broken the script. 5 hours from completion, Elena had stepped off the agreed path and driven a stake into the center of the plan. Jack said nothing. I looked at him. He had set his phone down on the armrest with the slow deliberateness of a man setting down something that has become irrelevant. He was watching Elena with an expression I had never seen on his face in the 2 years I had known him. Not anger, not calculation. Something quieter. Something that was working through several things at once and arriving at each of them separately. His wife, his brother-in-law, a child. A child that if it existed would have a claim on assets Jack had spent 2 years engineering. "I'm sorry." His voice was flat, completely flat, the way a surface goes flat when all the texture has been removed. "Could you repeat that, Elena?" Not a question, the sentence shape of a question with none of its actual function. Elena turned toward him. The steadiness in her voice developed its first fault line. "Jack, this isn't the time. You are telling this room," he said, and he spoke with the careful precision of a man who is choosing each word so that no one can later claim they misunderstood him, including me, your husband, that you are carrying your sister's husband's child. On Christmas Eve, in front of witnesses. What's between David and me is what exactly... Jack took one step forward, not aggressive, deliberate. "Because I have spent considerable time and resources on an arrangement that required your full cooperation, and I am now wondering whether you have been operating from a separate agenda this entire time." "You want to talk about separate agendas?" Elena's voice climbed. "You have been running money through my family's accounts for 2 years, Jack. Don't lecture me about..." "That's enough." David's voice cut across the room, sharp, the voice he used when he needed to stop something before it became uncontainable. Jack turned to him. "You," Jack said, and the single word carried the full weight of everything he had just calculated, "need to be quiet." David opened his mouth. I said quiet. Jack's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "You brought your affair into a financial operation that required precision and discretion, and now your girlfriend has just announced a pregnancy in a room with witnesses and a ticking transfer window. So you will sit down and you will not speak again until I tell you to." David sat down. I watched this happen. I watched the man who had spent 6 years being the most controlled person in every room he entered get managed into silence by the business partner who was now deciding whether the partnership still had value. It was from a purely observational standpoint extraordinary. I reached into my blazer pocket. Not for the DNA report. For my phone. I placed it on the coffee table face-up, speaker on. "Marcus," I said, Are you there? The room went silent with a totality that I had not heard since the moment the screen lit up in the courtroom 18 months later, with 47 transactions on display. Marcus's voice came through the speaker clearly, calmly, without preamble. "I'm here, Clara." No one in that room moved. Eleanor's hope had left her face. What replaced it was the expression I knew best from her, the rapid, internal recalculation of a woman who has spent decades managing information and has just realized she may have lost track of a variable. David stared at the phone on the table as though it were something that had appeared without explanation. Jack looked at it, then at me. And in that look, in the specific quality of the silence between us, I saw the moment he understood that the phone had been ready before Elena stood up. That the phone had been ready before Jack announced the transfer window. That possibly the phone and the person on the other end of it had been ready for considerably longer than tonight. Elena sank back into her chair. For 6 years, David had been the most capable person in every room he chose to enter. He had studied the rooms before he walked into them. He had learned the people before he met them. He had arrived at every situation having already determined how it would end, but he had never been in a room like this one. He hadn't known what this room was. He had walked in thinking it was the final scene of his plan, and it had been the first scene of mine. I looked at him across the coffee table, and I watched him begin to understand the difference. Nobody moved to turn off the speaker. That was the first thing I noticed. 5 people in a room, and not one of them reached for the phone on the coffee table to end the call. David could have. Jack could have. Even Eleanor, who was closest to the door, could have walked out and removed herself from whatever was coming. None of them did. Which told me something about the particular kind of paralysis that descends on people when they sense that the information arriving is going to find them regardless, that walking away from the phone wouldn't stop the words. It would just mean hearing them under worse circumstances later. Marcus gave them exactly 3 seconds of silence before he continued. In February of 2021, he said, Clara was involved in a single-vehicle accident on Route 82 outside Aspen. The official report cited mechanical failure. We retained an independent certified engineer to re-examine the vehicle documentation 14 months later. A brief pause. The brake line on Clara's car was not a failure. It was a cut. Clean. Deliberate, made with a tool consistent with industrial cable shears. The original repair shop flagged an anomaly in their internal notes and did not include it in the insurance-facing report. We have both documents. David had not moved since I placed the phone on the table. He sat with his hands on his knees and his eyes fixed on a point approximately 6 inches above the phone. The expression of a man who has been trained to project composure and is currently discovering the limits of that training. Additionally, Marcus continued, cellular records subpoenaed under the federal investigation show that David placed a call to Elena at 7:43 in the morning on the day of the accident. Clara left the house at 8 o'clock. The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Elena's jaw tightened. 3 hours and 17 minutes after the accident was reported. Marcus said, David filed an insurance claim on Clara's vehicle policy. The beneficiary designation on the associated life insurance policy had been updated 6 weeks prior. Jack picked up his phone, not to make a call to check the time. With the automatic reflex of a man whose entire evening has just been restructured around a variable he didn't account for, David turned to Elena. The composure had developed a fracture not large, but visible, the kind that spreads if you press on it. You told me you deleted everything. His voice was low, careful. The voice of a man who is trying to have a private conversation in a room that has stopped being private. Elena looked at him with the steady calm of someone who has been holding a card for a long time and has just played it. I kept a copy, she said. Insurance. You, of all people, should understand that. Elena. If anything happened to me, she said, and I mean anything, an accident, a sudden illness, a fall down a staircase in a mountain villa, the full file goes to the FBI automatically. I set it up 2 years ago. She held his gaze. So no, you were never going to be able to fix this the same way twice. The room absorbed that. I watched David understand in real time the architecture of what Elena had built around him, not out of loyalty or love, but out of the same cold strategic intelligence that had kept her useful to him in the first place. They had been holding each other in place for 2 years, not partners, not lovers. Two people with enough on each other to make mutual destruction the only guaranteed outcome of separation. Eleanor stood up. She didn't do it dramatically. She simply rose from her chair with the slow deliberateness of a woman whose body has decided to move before her mind has finished processing the reason. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at David with an expression I had never seen on her face. Not anger, not calculation. Something rawer than either. You tried to kill my daughter. She said it quietly, not a question. Eleanor. David's voice had recovered some of its steadiness. This is out of context. The accident. You told me this was about the money. Her voice did not rise. It went flatter, which was worse. You told me Clara would sign the transfer would clear, and that was the end of it. You told me nobody was going to get hurt. Nobody did get hurt. Because the brake line didn't work the way you needed it to. Eleanor's voice finally found an edge. Not because you didn't try. Eleanor, Jack said. Don't. She turned to him. Don't manage me right now, Jack. Jack closed his mouth. I looked at my mother standing in the center of the room, a woman who had conspired to steal from her own daughter who had known her husband was alive, and said nothing, who had allowed a 30-year lie to run her family into the ground, and I watched the specific narrow line she was drawing. She would steal. She would lie. She would look the other way on fraud and extortion and the quiet erasure of a man's existence. But murder apparently was on the other side of the line. The distinction still mattered to her. I noted it. I did not find it comforting, but I noted it. Clara. My voice when I finally spoke surprised me. It came out steady and direct, and without any of the weight I had been carrying for 4 years. I was looking at David. 3 years planning, 6 years executing. Was any part of it real? He looked at me. For the first time all evening, David Whitmore had nothing prepared for the silence. No version of himself available that could answer that question and still be believed. He opened his mouth once, then closed it. The phone on the table stayed on. Marcus stayed quiet, the quiet of a man who understands that some moments need to complete themselves without intervention. Jack stood up. He moved to the window and stood with his back to the room for a moment, not looking at the snow I realized, but at the reflection of the room in the dark glass, watching everyone behind him without appearing to. Running numbers I couldn't see the end of. He had come into this evening with a transfer window and a $700,000 arrangement and a clear sequence of events. What he had now was a room full of exposed conspirators, an FBI line open on a coffee table, a wife who had just made herself a liability, and a partner who had attempted murder with insufficient planning. Jack was many things. Sentimental was not one of them. He's about to make the most important decision of his life, I thought. And Marcus is about to make it for him. Jack had one hand on the back of his chair and his eyes on the door when Marcus spoke again. Jack. Not a question, not a warning, just his name, delivered with the specific weight of a person who needs someone to stop moving for 30 more seconds. Before you decide which side of this evening you're standing on, there's one more thing. Jack stopped. He didn't turn around, but he stopped. The FBI recovered a draft document from David's personal email server. Marcus said, retrieved under federal search warrant in October from the server provider's archived backup, dated September 15th, 2023. A brief pause. It's a legal defense strategy memo, prepared by David's private attorney. It outlines a contingency plan for federal prosecution 1 in which all 47 unauthorized transactions are attributed to a rogue banking officer who acted without David's knowledge or authorization. The room was completely still. The officer named in the document, Marcus continued, is described as having exploited privileged access to the Whitfield accounts over a period of several years. The memo recommends a defense posture built around David's ignorance of the transactions that he was in effect the victim of an employee's financial misconduct. Another pause. The name used as a placeholder in the draft is Jack Calloway. Jack turned around. He looked at David with the expression of a man running a single, very clean calculation. Not rage, not betrayal, just the cold arithmetic of someone who has just been handed the exact number he needed to make a decision. David did not look back. He was studying the middle distance with the focused intensity of a man who has decided that if he doesn't acknowledge something directly, it might resolve itself without his participation. It didn't work when he was 12. It wasn't working now. "How long have you had this?" Jack asked. He directed the question at the phone on the table. Which was the right instinct. Marcus was the only person in the room who would give him a straight answer. "Long enough," Marcus said. Specifically, long enough that the question of whether you cooperate tonight affects the answer to a different question, which is how much of what happens next you have any control over. Jack absorbed that. He set his glass down on the end table beside him slowly, the way you set something down when you're done with it, rather than just putting it aside. Then he reached back and lifted his jacket from the chair and held it in one hand. He looked at the room. Eleanor sitting rigid and silent, a woman who had moved 3 steps away from David's end of the sofa when nobody was paying attention. Elena still in her chair, watching Jack with an expression caught somewhere between panic and something she couldn't quite name yet. David studying the floor. And me. Jack looked at me for a moment that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "I want a deal," he said. "Full cooperation. Every transfer, every account, every communication, every party. Complete disclosure starting tonight." He looked at the phone. "In exchange for substantial assistance consideration from the prosecutor's office. In writing." The U.S. Attorney's Office generally prioritizes the first person through that particular door, Marcus said. "Cooperation agreements tend to reflect the order in which people arrive. Then we shouldn't waste time." Jack glanced at his watch. "I have an FBI agent's direct line. I assume Agent Cole is already aware of the situation." "Agent Cole has been aware of the situation since approximately 9:15 this evening," Marcus said. "He's been waiting for your call." Something moved across Jack's face, not surprise exactly. More like the recognition of a professional acknowledging another professional's preparation. He buttoned one button on his jacket, picked up his phone. "I'll be outside," he said to the room, which was not an announcement so much as a statement of fact. He crossed to the door. His hand found the handle. "Jack?" Elena's voice came out high and sharp, the voice of someone who has just realized the geometry of the room has changed, and they are no longer near the center of it. "Jack, we need to talk." The door opened. Cold air moved through the room for a moment. The door closed. The sound of it was very final. Elena stared at the door, then at David. David was looking at his hands. Eleanor had turned slightly away from both of them. The posture of a woman quietly and efficiently removing herself from an association that had just become toxic. The alliance that had spent 2 years constructing tonight had taken approximately 11 minutes to collapse. 3 people in a room, and not one of them was looking at another. I stood up. Nobody stopped me. Nobody spoke. I crossed the living room without hurrying and pushed through the door into the back hallway. My father was standing at the kitchen table exactly where I had left him, coat still on, briefcase closed. The particular stillness of a man who has been patient for a very long time and is now simply waiting for the last piece to move. I went to the counter. The second drawer from the left, the one where Sarah kept the household files, the insurance documents, the maintenance records. Behind the utilities folder, in a plain white envelope with no label, was a manila folder I had placed there 8 months ago. I pulled it out. Inside, a set of medical records from a private reproductive health clinic in Denver, subpoenaed under the federal investigation. Elena's name on the header. Date range spanning 3 years. The relevant notation on the third page flagged with a paperclip. I held the folder for a moment. Elena still believed she had a card to play. She believed the pregnancy gave her standing leverage over David, a claim on whatever remained after tonight, a reason for Eleanor to keep protecting her. She didn't know that the card she was holding was blank, and she didn't know that I had known it was blank for 8 months. I tucked the folder under my arm and walked back toward the living room door. I walked back into the living room the same way I had left it, without announcement, without hurry. 3 people remained. David on the sofa, elbows on knees, hands loosely clasped, the posture of a man who has run out of moves and is waiting to see which one he's being charged with first. Eleanor standing near the fireplace, arms crossed, in the specific stillness of a woman deciding how far she can separate herself from the events of the last 20 minutes without physically leaving the room. Elena in her chair, upright now, watching the door I'd come through with the expression of someone who has been recalculating since Jack's footsteps faded down the front steps. The white envelope was in my hand. I set it on the coffee table without ceremony, the same table that still held the unsigned authorization form, the expensive pen, the champagne glasses with the rings they'd left on the wood. Clara. Elena's voice came back fast, trying to reclaim momentum before I could establish any. Whatever you think you have, a court will always consider the welfare of a child. That's not something you can audit your way around. Dr. Christine Webb, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I opened the envelope and set the top document on the table, face-up oriented, so the header was readable from where Elena was sitting. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, March 14, 2015. Bilateral tubal ligation elective procedure, fully documented, irreversible. I looked at her. You were 23. The procedure was billed through the Whitfield Family Insurance Plan back when you were still listed as a dependent. I found the insurance billing record 8 months ago. It came up during the federal audit after the warrant was issued. A surgical procedure billed through the Whitfield Family Plan while you were still a dependent. The kind of line item that looks like nothing until you know what you're looking for. I paused. You've known for 8 years that you can't have children. You just forgot that reading insurance records is how I spend my afternoons. The silence in the room was a different quality from any silence that had come before it. Not the silence of people waiting for something to happen. The silence of people absorbing something that has already happened and cannot be undone. Eleanor's wineglass was in her hand. She set it down on the mantel behind her, not carefully, just down. The sound of it harder than she intended. She was looking at Elena. Is that true? Her voice had lost its social texture entirely. What was underneath was something I hadn't heard from my mother in a long time, something unguarded, without architecture. Elena said nothing. Look at me. Eleanor moved away from the fireplace, 2 steps toward Elena's chair, and her voice dropped the way voices do when a person is trying to keep something contained that is not going to stay contained. Elena, is that true? The silence stretched. And then Elena did something I had not seen her do in the entirety of the evening. She looked away, down to the left at the floor beside her chair, which was, of course, its own answer. You used a grandchild that didn't exist. Eleanor's voice came out very quiet. You sat in my house at my table and you told me. She stopped. Started again. I have been waiting. You know how long I have been waiting for. Another stop. Her jaw tightened. I watched my mother find the specific contained fury of a woman who has just discovered that the one manipulation she never saw coming came from the person she protected the longest. She had known about the fraud. She had cooperated with Jack's leverage. She had stood at a memorial service for her living husband and accepted sympathy from people who genuinely believed her. She had done all of those things without apparently losing her footing. But this. You used my hope, Eleanor said. The word landed with a precision that I recognized. It was the word she meant, not a softer version of it. You used the one thing I actually wanted and you turned it into a bargaining chip. Mom. Elena's voice came out thin and wrong. I was trying to secure our position. David was going to take everything and leave us both with, "Don't." The word was a door closing. "Don't explain this to me as strategy. I understand strategy. I have been doing strategy since before you knew what the word meant." Eleanor's voice went colder than I had ever heard it. "You lied to my face. About a child. You looked me in the eye, and you lied." "You lied too," Elena said. The words came out sharper than she intended. Reflexive, defensive, the response of someone cornered and running on instinct. "You've been lying for 30 years. Don't lecture me about what I have done," Eleanor said, and her voice had gone somewhere below cold, somewhere I didn't have a name for, "is separate from what you did to me tonight. Those are two different conversations, and we are only having one of them right now." Elena closed her mouth. David had not moved. He was still sitting in the same position, hands loosely clasped, eyes somewhere in the middle distance. He had the look of a man who has correctly identified that any contribution he makes to the current conversation will be used against him, and has therefore elected to contribute nothing. It was, in its way, the first intelligent decision he'd made all evening. I stood at the edge of the room and watched my mother look at Elena with the specific devastation of a person who has been betrayed by the one they protected most. Not the loudest betrayal, not the most legally significant, but the most personal, the one that arrived through the gap in the armor she had kept facing outward her entire life. Eleanor turned. She looked at me, not with hostility, not with the practiced social warmth she had deployed selectively over 6 years of dinners and holidays and careful distance. She looked at me, the way people look when they have run out of the energy required to maintain a particular version of themselves. Tired. And something else. Something I didn't have a word for yet. Something that was not quite an apology, because my mother was constitutionally incapable of those, but was in the same neighborhood. I looked back at her. I didn't offer her forgiveness. I didn't offer her condemnation. I simply looked at her and waited the way Marcus had taught me to wait. The way 4 years of building a case had taught me to wait, because Eleanor Whitfield had one move left, and she was going to have to make it on her own terms or not at all. She understood what I was waiting for. I could see it in the way her shoulders settled, not defeat exactly. Recognition. The specific recognition of a woman who has spent her entire life managing outcomes and has just arrived at the one outcome that cannot be managed from the position she's currently standing in. She had one move left, and for the first time in her life, it was also the right one. Eleanor's hand went into her handbag with the deliberate motion of someone who has rehearsed this moment not for drama, but because rehearsal is the only way she knows how to do anything that costs her something. She pulled out a single folded sheet, set it on the coffee table beside the unsigned authorization form, beside the medical records, beside the champagne glasses, beside all the other documents that had accumulated on that table over the course of the evening like evidence at a scene, which I supposed was exactly what it was. "Geneva account," she said. "Routing number 447, Banque Privée Suisse." She kept her eyes on the table while she spoke, then lifted them to me. "Jack opened it 18 months ago. Under my name, without my signature, without my authorization." A pause. "I found the statements 3 weeks ago in a folder he'd left in the home office. He'd mislabeled it under household expenses." "Why didn't you say something 3 weeks ago?" I asked. She was quiet for long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then, "Because I needed to understand what I was holding before I decided what to do with it." She straightened slightly, "And because I needed to know whether Jack had figured out that I'd found it." Had he? No. The word was flat and certain. If he had, tonight would have gone differently. I looked at the account statement on the table. The header was in French Standard for Swiss private banking, but the account number was clear, and the routing designation matched what Marcus had described in the federal filing as the final destination layer of the transfer network. Jack hadn't just used Eleanor as a name on paper. He had built her in as the terminus. The person standing at the end of the wire when the money stopped moving and the investigators started counting. David as the architect, Jack as the engineer. Eleanor as the address on the package. 3 people, each one holding a piece, none of them knowing the full picture. Except Jack. Jack had known the full picture. Jack had designed it. Marcus, I said. Add the Geneva account to the FBI filing, routing 447 Banque Privée. Eleanor Whitfield as the registered account holder under unauthorized identity use. Noted, Marcus said through the speaker. Agent Cole has been notified. The account is being flagged for freeze order. Thank you. I picked up the statement and slid it into the folder with the other documents. Eleanor watched me do it without objecting. She had placed it on the table for exactly this purpose, and we both understood that. Why now? I asked. Not accusatory. A genuine question. Why tonight specifically? Eleanor looked at the table for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than I had heard it all evening, stripped of its management, its architecture, its decades of practiced composure. Because your father built everything we had, she said, with his own hands, every property, every account, every dollar in that trust. A long pause, and I burned it down. Her voice didn't break. Eleanor Whitfield's voice did not break, but it went somewhere smaller. I burned it down, and I told myself it was for the family. The room was silent. I had waited 4 years to hear my mother say something true. I had not expected it to sound like that. From the hallway behind me, the back hallway, the one that connected the kitchen to the main corridor, came the sound of a footstep. One deliberate, then another. Eleanor heard it. She looked past me toward the hallway door. Thomas Whitfield stepped through it. He had taken off his coat. He was wearing a dark sweater, and his reading glasses were folded in his breast pocket the way they always had been. The small, ordinary detail that hit me somewhere unexpected. He looked exactly like a man who had been waiting in a kitchen for the right moment and had decided the moment had arrived. Eleanor made a sound I had never heard from her. Not a word. Just a sound, short, involuntary. The kind that bypasses every layer of control a person has built over a lifetime and comes directly from somewhere unguarded. The wine glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the hardwood and broke cleanly, 2 pieces, the stem and the bowl, the wine spreading in a dark arc across the floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. Eleanor stood very still. She was looking at Thomas the way people look at something they have spent 2 years telling themselves is not real. Thomas! Her voice came out as barely more than breath. Hello, Eleanor. He walked into the room at the same unhurried pace he had used to walk through the back door, the pace of a man who is no longer in a hurry because the waiting is over. He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough to speak without raising his voice, not close enough to touch. You should have... She stopped. Started again. You were supposed to be dead, he said. Yes, I know. He looked at her with an expression that was not anger and not grief, but something that had passed through both of those things and come out the other side as something simpler and harder. I was in that hospital room for 6 weeks, Eleanor. The first 2 I couldn't remember my own name. The last 4, I lay there and listened to what was happening outside and tried to understand how we had arrived at this. A pause. I heard every conversation you had with Jack in that corridor. Thomas, 32 years, he said. I built everything we had from the ground up. The trust, the properties. The accounts, I built it so that Clara would have something that couldn't be taken from her. Something that was hers, regardless of what happened. He looked at her steadily. And you stood in the corridor outside my room and told a man to make sure I didn't survive. The silence in the room had a different quality now, not the silence of people waiting for something to happen, but the silence of people in the presence of something they cannot look away from. Elena had not moved. David had gone completely still on the sofa, and then with the slow deliberateness of a man whose instincts have finally overridden his strategy, he shifted forward on the cushion and began to rise. He had looked at Thomas the way a man looks at 30 years of prison time standing in a room. He was halfway to standing when the first light appeared through the window, blue and red, faint through the snow, sweeping in the slow, patient rotation of vehicles that are not in a hurry because they have already arrived where they need to be. The sound of tires on the packed gravel of the front drive, then a second vehicle, then the distant, clear tone of a radio. Detective Sandra Miller, Pitkin County Sheriff's Office, 2 units on standby at the base of the mountain since 8 o'clock. I looked at the window, then at the room. David standing half up from the sofa, Elena with her hands in her lap and nowhere to go. Eleanor looking at the man she had spent 2 years telling the world was dead, and the man looking back at her with 32 years of patience and a briefcase full of documents. I had one thing left to do before that door opened, the part I had saved for last. I had been carrying them since 8 o'clock that morning, 4 envelopes slim enough to sit flat against the inner lining of my blazer without a visible outline. I had checked them twice before coming downstairs for dinner the way you check a set of documents before a filing deadline. Because the consequence of a missing page at the wrong moment is something you cannot recover from. I crossed to the Christmas tree in the corner of the room. The ornaments caught the light from the police vehicles outside, blue, then red, then blue again, sweeping in slow rotation through the falling snow. It was in its way the most honest the room had looked all evening. I turned to face them. David half standing beside the sofa. Elena in her chair, very still, the particular stillness of someone who has run every available calculation and arrived at the same answer each time. Eleanor standing near the fireplace, the broken glass still on the floor at her feet, because no one had moved to clean it up, and the moment for doing so had passed. Thomas in the corner near the hallway door, hands at his sides, watching. "I always loved giving gifts," I said. My voice came out warm and unhurried. The voice I used in client presentations when I needed a room to stay calm, while I showed them something they didn't want to see. My father taught me that the best ones tell the truth. Thomas, in the corner, said nothing, but something in his expression moved. I reached into my blazer. The first envelope was the thickest. I walked to David and placed it on the cushion beside him, not in his hand on the cushion, so that picking it up was a choice he had to make consciously. "David." I kept my voice level. No heat. No satisfaction, just the clean precision of someone reading from a prepared statement. "Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, wire transfer violations. The criminal complaint was filed with the Pitkin County Sheriff's Office at 8 o'clock this evening in coordination with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit." I looked at him. "Everything in that envelope you already know." He looked at the envelope. He didn't reach for it. "Clara." His voice came out lower than I had heard it all night, stripped of the warmth he had been deploying like a tool, stripped of the certainty. Just his voice, which was, I realized, the first time all evening I had heard it without a performance attached to it. "The arrest warrant is already signed," I said. "There's nothing in that envelope that changes anything. I just thought you should have a copy." I stepped back. The second envelope was thinner. I walked to Elena and set it on the armrest of her chair. "Elena, civil complaint, fraud, conspiracy, and 2 counts of criminal extortion, phone records, financial records, and the dead man's switch file you set up in 2021. I paused. "The same file you built to protect yourself from David. It protected you from him. It didn't protect you from me." I held her gaze. "The records don't lie. They never did." Elena looked at the envelope on her armrest. She didn't speak. There was nothing to say that the room didn't already know, and Elena, whatever else she was, had always understood when a moment was past managing. The third envelope was the one I had thought about longest. I walked to Eleanor. She was standing straight, the posture she had maintained through 50 years of decisions, the posture that had never left her, regardless of what was happening around her. But her hands, I noticed, were not entirely steady. I placed the envelope on the mantel beside her. "This one isn't a legal document," I said. "It's the DNA report, official laboratory certification. Elena's biological father is Richard Harmon, your business partner in 1994, the same year you told my father the premature birth had been a girl you'd lost." Eleanor looked at the envelope, then at Elena, who had turned her face toward the window. Then slowly, to the corner where Thomas was standing. Thomas gave a single quiet nod. "I've known for a long time, Eleanor Cole," he said. "I just needed the document." The paper slipped from the mantel and settled on the floor beside the broken glass. Eleanor didn't pick it up. She stood very still. And for one moment, a moment I had not expected and did not know what to do with. She looked not like the woman who had run this family like a balance sheet for 30 years, but like someone much older and much more tired, standing in the wreckage of a version of herself she had built too carefully and held too long. I looked at her for 1 second. Then I stepped back. Jack received his envelope outside. Federal charges, 47 counts of wire fraud and money laundering alongside the signed cooperation agreement terms. Agent Cole walked him through both documents personally. First through the door gets the best deal. That part at least Jack had gotten right. The front door opened. Ryan Cole came in first. He was wearing a dark jacket over a gray shirt, his FBI credentials on a lanyard snow, still on his shoulders, from the walk up the front steps. He was 40 years old, built like someone who ran long distances for reasons unrelated to fitness. And he moved through the room the way agents move when they have been watching a situation for 18 months and are finally allowed to walk into it deliberately without theater. He looked at the room, the documents on the coffee table, the broken glass, Thomas in the corner, the envelopes. "Looks like I missed the gift exchange," he said. Behind him, Detective Sandra Miller of the Pitkin County Sheriff's Office stepped through the door. She was in her early 50s, silver badge on her belt, a woman whose expression communicated that she had seen a great many living rooms in the course of her career and had long since stopped being surprised by what she found in them. Her eyes found David immediately. David Whitmore. Her voice was practiced and completely without inflection, the voice of a person who has read these words enough times that they have become procedural rather than personal. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and insurance fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." David stopped listening to the words at some point. I could see at the moment his eyes stopped tracking Miller and moved instead to me. He looked at me across the room, and what I saw on his face in that moment was something I had never seen in 6 years of marriage, 6 years of carefully constructed performances, 6 years of a man presenting exactly the version of himself he had decided I should see. I saw him without it. I didn't look away. 10:45. The villa had filled with the particular quiet that follows controlled chaos, not silence, but the absence of urgency. Voices in the entryway, radio static from the driveway, the sound of boots on hardwood, and the professional, unhurried movement of people who have a procedure to follow and are following it. David did not resist. That was the first thing I noticed. Miller's partner, a younger officer whose name I hadn't caught, brought the handcuffs out, and David stood with his wrists together, and his face arranged in the careful blankness of a man who has decided that composure is the only asset he has left to protect. He said nothing. He looked at no one. The cuffs clicked. Elena was standing near the window. She had been standing there since Jack walked out, and she was still standing there now, with her arms crossed tight against herself, and tears moving down her face in the slow, steady way of someone who is not crying for effect, who is simply in the process of understanding that the evening she had planned and the evening that had actually occurred were two entirely different events. She didn't speak. There was nothing in her current inventory that would have served her, and on some level she understood that. I did not go to her. Eleanor sat on the sofa. She had chosen that seat after Thomas stepped out to speak with Ryan in the front hall, and she had not moved since spine-straight hands folded on her knee, looking at the Christmas tree in the corner of the room. The ornaments caught the light from the window, still cycling in that slow blue-red rotation. She had been looking at the tree since before the officers entered, and she was looking at it still. She was not in handcuffs. That had been the arrangement Marcus had reached the Pitkin County Prosecutor's office at 6:30 that afternoon. and by 7:45, Eleanor had signed a cooperation agreement through her own attorney. One she'd retained 2 weeks ago when she found Jack's Geneva statements and understood for the first time that the position she was in had no exit that didn't cost her something significant. Full cooperation in exchange for no immediate arrest, conditional immunity on the conspiracy charges pending the scope of her disclosures. She had chosen the right option. That was the correct calculation. But the calculation had a price that no document captured. She sat in her living room on Christmas Eve and watched every decision she had made for 30 years finish arriving at the same place, and there was no one beside her, and no one was coming. From outside through the front door came the sound of footsteps measured, accompanied. Jack came through the door with a federal marshal at his left shoulder already processed, already past the point of performance. He had straightened his jacket. That was the only concession he made to the circumstances the jacket buttoned. He scanned the room with the efficiency of a man cataloging what he was leaving behind. His eyes moved to Elena. A long moment. Then away. With the deliberateness of someone who has made a decision and intends to hold it. Elena watched him cross the room. He didn't look back. He was almost at the hallway door when he stopped. Sarah was standing near the side table, the one where the tea tray had been, where she had set down cups and moved through the room for 28 years, as though the furniture of other people's lives was simply the landscape she navigated. She was holding the tray with both hands, watching him, the way she watched everything directly, without commentary, without effect. Jack looked at her. "You've been feeding information out of this house," he said. His voice was flat, not accusatory, almost clinical. The tone of a man who has been defeated and is now simply trying to understand the mechanism. "Who were you working for?" Sarah set the tray down on the side table. She straightened. And she looked at Jack with an expression I had never seen on her face in 4 years of living in this house, not the expression of a woman performing invisibility, but the expression of a woman who had been choosing it deliberately for a very long time and had just decided to stop. "I've been in this house for 28 years, she said. Her voice was measured and clear, the voice of someone who is not performing and has nothing to prove. "I watched Mr. Whitfield build every room of it. I watched Mrs. Whitfield redecorate it 3 times to cover his memory. And I watched you walk through the front door 2 Christmases ago and start counting the silver." Jack's expression didn't change. "Answer the question." I answer to Thomas Whitfield," Sarah said. "I always have." She looked across the room to where I was standing. "And to his daughter." The quiet in the room settled into a different shape. Ryan had come back in from the front hall. He moved to stand a few feet from Jack, not blocking him. Just present the positioning of someone adding weight to a moment without making it confrontational. "For the record," Ryan said, and his voice had that particular federal agent cadence that made everything sound like it was already being transcribed. "The pendulum clock on the mantel has been operating under a federal surveillance order since June 23, 2023. He glanced at the clock. Excellent acoustic range for a residential device. Everything said in this room over the past 18 months has been recorded, time-stamped, and stored on a secure federal server." Jack turned and looked at the clock. The small red indicator light blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. Steady. Patient. The same rhythm it had kept all evening. Jack looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned away and said nothing, and the marshal at his shoulder moved him toward the door. Some calculations, when they finally come out, leave no remainder worth speaking. They brought David back through the room. A few minutes later, the processing had moved to the front hallway, and he needed to pass through to reach the vehicle outside. Miller's partner held his arm with the practiced lightness of an officer managing someone who is not resisting. David stopped. The officer paused a few seconds. The courtesy extended to someone who has not made the job difficult. David looked at me. Not the way he had looked at me all evening, not with calculation, not with the smile, not with any of the machinery he had spent years installing behind his eyes. He looked at me the way a person looks when they have run out of everything except the thing they actually are. "Black coffee," he said. His voice was very low. "No sugar." I actually started drinking it that way, after a while. A pause. "I just thought you should know that." I said nothing. He was not asking for anything. He was not apologizing. He was simply leaving a single true thing in the room the way people sometimes do when they are out of reasons to withhold it. The officer moved him forward. He did not look back. The front door opened and closed. The room settled into the specific stillness of a space that has held too much for too long and is only now beginning to release it. Ryan was in the hallway with Thomas speaking quietly. Miller's partner was at the door. The fire had burned down to its last effort. Elena had stopped crying. She sat in her chair with her hands in her lap and her face toward the window, not watching anything in particular, just sitting, which was the only available option left to her. Eleanor was still on the sofa, still looking at the Christmas tree. I stood in the center of the room with Sarah a few feet to my left, and I looked at my mother, 61 years old. Alone on a sofa, every protection she had ever built removed, and nothing underneath it. And I thought about 30 years of choices arriving at a single Christmas Eve. She had spent 30 years choosing wrong. And now she sat with the lights and the ornaments and the wreckage of every calculation, and there was nothing left to protect, and no one left to protect it for. 18 months. That was the distance between the night the back door opened in Aspen and the morning I sat at the defendant's table in Pitkin County District Court and watched Marcus finish telling the story to a room full of people who had been listening without breathing. He closed his folder. He looked at Judge Holloway. "That concludes the respondent's account of the events of December 24th, 2023, Your Honor." The courtroom was very quiet. Holloway had not moved in the last 40 minutes. She had listened to every word with her pen resting unused against the legal pad, the posture of a judge who has decided that the situation does not require notes because it is already fully formed. She looked at David's table now, and whatever she found there did not appear to alter her assessment. Gerald Pitt rose. "Your Honor, the plaintiff would like the opportunity to—" "Sit down, Mr. Pitt." He sat. From the gallery side of the room, Agent Ryan Cole stood up. He was in a dark suit today, the first time I had seen him in something other than field clothes. He carried a single file folder, worn at the edges, the kind that has been handled many times. He approached the front of the courtroom with the unhurried authority of someone who has been waiting a long time to be in this particular room and is in no rush now that he's here. "Your Honor," he said, "the FBI requests permission to submit a final piece of evidence into the record. A personal journal recovered from a safe deposit box registered to David Whitmore at First National Bank in Denver. The box was accessed under federal search warrant in September of 2023. Pitt was on his feet before Ryan finished the sentence. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense was not— Your office received notification of this evidence 9 months ago, Mr. Pitt." Holloway's voice had the quality of a door closing. "I have the disclosure confirmation in front of me. Sit down." Pitt sat down for the third time that morning. I had stopped counting the objections he had lost. "Proceed, Agent Cole," Holloway said. Ryan opened the folder. He extracted 2 pages photocopies, the originals presumably secured in a federal evidence room somewhere, and placed them on the exhibit stand. He looked at them briefly, the way a person looks at something they have read many times and know exactly where it lands. Entry dated March 14th, 2016. He said. His voice was level and clear, the voice of a man reading a document rather than performing one. Quote, "Met with Jack and Eleanor today. The plan is straightforward. Clara Whitfield is intelligent but isolated. She trusts systems more than people. That is her weakness. I need to become the exception. Architects are good at patience by nature. We build things meant to last until we decide to take them apart." End quote. The room absorbed that. I had read those words before Marcus had shown me the transcript 6 months ago in his office on a Tuesday afternoon with rain against the windows. I had read them and filed them in the same place I filed everything carefully without sentiment ready for use. I had thought I was prepared to hear them read aloud in a courtroom. I was not entirely right about that. Entry dated September 3, 2016. Ryan continued. 2 weeks before the documented first meeting between Mr. Whitmore and Miss Whitfield at the Denver Architecture Gala, quote, she orders the same coffee every morning. Black, no sugar. Hasn't dated in 14 months. Her father's trust is the only thing in her life that has never let her down. That's what I need to become until I'm ready to take the first one away. End quote. The silence in the room was complete. I was aware of David at the plaintiff's table, not looking at him, just aware of him the way you are aware of a fixed point. He had not moved since Ryan began reading. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table and his eyes forward, and whatever was happening behind them was not visible from where I was sitting. Judge Holloway looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Whitmore. Her voice had not raised at any point in the proceedings. It didn't raise now, but something in it had changed the specific quality of a person who has heard everything they needed to hear and has arrived at a conclusion that requires no further input. You did not fall into this marriage. You engineered it. From the point of first contact through the ceremony through 6 years of documented financial extraction, every element was constructed. She set her pen down. The Whitfield family trust was never marital property. It was a target. David said nothing. There was nothing available to him. Pitt's hand moved slightly on the table, not toward David, just a small, involuntary motion. The reflex of an attorney who has run out of tools and knows it. I thought about what David had said in the living room of the villa on Christmas Eve to my sister in a voice he thought I couldn't hear. She trusts me. 6 years, and I've never given her a reason not to. I thought about the morning I came downstairs and found him at the kitchen counter with my coffee already made black. No sugar, and how I had thought in that ordinary domestic moment that this was what it looked like when someone paid attention. He had been paying attention. Just not to me. She trusted systems more than people. I said. I hadn't intended to speak. The words came out quietly, directed at no one in particular, or perhaps at the version of myself that had sat across from a man for 6 years and given him credit for caring when he had simply been conducting research. That was accurate, I said. He studied me for 3 months before he said hello. He learned the coffee order, the routines, the loneliness. He was very good at it. I paused. For 6 years, he was genuinely very good at it. That's the last thing I'll give him that acknowledgement. No one in the room spoke. Holloway picked up her pen. The Whitfield Family Trust is hereby returned to the sole ownership of Clara Whitfield, effective immediately. All assets claimed by the plaintiff in these proceedings are frozen pending federal criminal process. She looked at both tables. This court refers the matters of conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and money laundering to the Pitkin County District Attorney and the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Colorado for coordinated prosecution. She lifted her gavel. This proceeding is concluded. The gavel came down. David did not stand. His attorney stood gathering papers with the mechanical precision of a man completing a task that has long since lost its purpose. David remained in his chair, not with dignity, not with composure, but simply because the legs that had carried him into this courtroom that morning had apparently decided their obligation was finished. I did not look at him. I looked instead at the courtroom doors at the far end of the room, the tall wooden ones that led out to the corridor where the light came in differently, where the air was cooler and the sound of the proceedings faded to something manageable. There was a man standing at the end of that corridor. He was 64 years old and wearing a dark jacket and holding a folded newspaper under one arm the way he always had. A habit so old and specific and unchanged that it moved through me like something from a different life, from the life that had existed before all of this and was apparently still waiting on the other side of the door. The courtroom doors opened onto a corridor that smelled of old wood and summer air. Colorado in June is not subtle about its light. It comes through the high windows of the Pitkin County Courthouse at an angle that doesn't ask permission, clear and direct. The kind of light that makes everything look more specific than it did a moment ago. I stood in it for a moment. Just stood. Behind me, the courtroom was doing its ordinary post-proceeding work voices movement, the sound of chairs and briefcases and people returning to whatever came next. Ahead, the corridor stretched toward the building's main entrance, long and quiet, with wooden benches along the walls the way courthouses always have, as though they understood that people would need somewhere to sit when things were finished. Marcus came out behind me. He stopped beside me and said nothing for a moment, just stood there in the same light, which was in its way the most useful thing he could have done. "You all right?" he said. He studied me for 3 months before he said hello. The words came out even without rehearsal. I still didn't see it until it was almost too late. "You saw it in time," Marcus said. "That's the only part that counts." I didn't answer. He wasn't wrong, but some things don't resolve cleanly just because the statement is accurate, and Marcus knew that too. A door opened to my left. Vivienne Hart came through it, 70 years old, silver hair, a charcoal suit that had been expensive 20 years ago and had aged into something better than expensive. She had been Thomas's estate attorney for 3 decades. The woman who had held the original Whitfield Trust documents in a locked filing cabinet in her Denver office while Eleanor sold properties and Jack moved money, and the world rearranged itself around a man who was supposedly dead. She had known Thomas was alive for 4 years. She was, as far as I knew, the only person outside of Marcus and Sarah who had. She took my hand in both of hers, a brief, firm grip. Not a performance of warmth, but the real thing. "Your father told me you would handle this better than anyone else could," she said. Her voice was dry and direct, the voice of a woman who stopped softening things decades ago. He said it 32 times over 15 years. I counted. I looked at her. He said that every time, without variation. She held my gaze for one more moment. He was right as it happens. She released my hand, gave Marcus a brief nod, and moved down the corridor with the purpose of a woman who has other files waiting. I watched her go. 32 times. 15 years of telling his attorney his daughter would be all right. In the years before he disappeared, and the years after, through all of it. I had not known that. It arrived now in a courthouse hallway in June, and I let it. From my right came the sound of footsteps, measured, accompanied. David. He was moving toward the side exit with an officer at his elbow, headed in the direction of the vehicle that had been waiting since the proceedings concluded. His attorney walked 2 paces behind, already on his phone, already managing the next problem. David slowed as he passed me. The officer didn't stop him 3 seconds, no more. The quiet allowance extended to someone who had not made the morning difficult. David looked at me. Not the way he had looked at me in the courtroom, not the way he had looked at me across dinner tables and living rooms and 6 years of constructed ordinary life. He looked at me the way a person looks when the version of themselves they have been presenting has been fully retired, and there is nothing left between them and whoever they actually are. Was any of it real? His voice was low, stripped of everything that had been layered over it. For you. Was anything? Yes. I looked at him directly. That's why it was worth protecting. He held my gaze for a moment. "Goodbye, David." He was taken away. I did not watch him go. There was nothing in that direction that required my attention anymore. I turned toward the end of the corridor. Sarah was sitting on one of the wooden benches near the main entrance, her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes closed, not asleep, resting. The specific rest of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time and has just been allowed to set it down. I had not seen Sarah sit like that in 4 years. It suited her. On the benches across the corridor, the ones facing the windows, 2 women sat at opposite ends of the same row. Elena Coate in her lap, looking at nothing in particular through the glass. Eleanor, spine straight out of decades of habit, hands, folded, eyes forward. No one had come for either of them. Not a friend, not an attorney offering comfort, not a family member stepping forward from the gallery. The space between them on the bench was not the distance of two people who had just had an argument. It was the distance of two people who had run out of the thing that had been holding them in the same story and were now simply waiting for their separate transportation to arrive. I looked at them for a moment. My mother and my sister in a courthouse hallway with nothing left to protect and no one left to protect it for. I did not go to them. It was not coldness, it was accuracy. There was nothing I could do for either of them in that hallway that would serve any of us, and we all knew it. Their accounting would come in other rooms, at other times with other people. I turned away. At the far end of the corridor, past the benches and the light and the ordinary Tuesday morning business of a Colorado courthouse, my father was standing. Dark jacket, the folded newspaper under his arm that had been there every time he'd come to pick me up from school, every Saturday morning at the kitchen table, every version of ordinary life before it was taken apart. He had not come into the courtroom that had been the arrangement, because the legal proceedings required his testimony to remain clean and separate. But he had been here since 7 in the morning. Sarah had told me. He had been here the whole time. I walked toward him. Not quickly. There was no reason to hurry anymore. When I reached him, he opened his arms, and I, who had not cried in 4 years, who had processed every piece of evidence and every document and every moment of the last 4 years, with the measured control of someone who understood that falling apart was a luxury the work could not afford, stepped into them. His hand came to the back of my head the way it had when I was small, and the world had briefly overwhelmed me. And I stood there in a courthouse corridor in June, with my face against my father's shoulder, and let the thing I had been carrying put itself down. "It's over," I said. "I know," he said. We stayed like that for a while. Behind me, through the high windows, the Colorado sky was the specific blue that exists only at altitude, clear and enormous, and entirely indifferent to the things that happen underneath it. The Rockies were visible at the edge of the frame, unchanged by any of it the way mountains are. I had spent 4 years holding a version of myself together that the work required. The woman who had walked into a marriage that was never a marriage, who had built her life around a foundation someone else had designed to fail, who had spent 4 years quietly, systematically dismantling that design piece by piece until the whole thing came apart on a Christmas Eve in Aspen. That woman had finished her work. Standing in my father's arms in a courthouse corridor, I understood for the first time, with the clarity that comes only after the noise stops, that whatever came next would be built on different ground that was actually mine. November in Denver means the mountains decide how close they want to be. Some mornings the Rockies are right there, sharp and specific through the 12th floor glass. Close enough that you forget there are 40 miles between you and the nearest peak. Other mornings they disappear entirely into cloud. I had stopped trying to predict which kind of morning it would be. The mountains didn't owe anyone consistency. 5 months since the gavel. David's federal criminal trial ended in September. 11 hours of jury deliberation. Guilty on all counts conspiracy to commit murder, 47 counts of wire fraud. Sentencing in January. The number being discussed was 20 years per count, with 47 counts on the federal indictment. The cumulative exposure made the number academic. His architecture license had already been revoked by the state board. That last part landed differently than I expected. More final somehow than the rest. Jack took the full cooperation agreement. 8 years federal facility. Permanent bar from banking. He had given them everything, every account, every transfer, every name. The U.S. Attorney called his cooperation extensive. I read that once and didn't return to it. Elena was in Denver. Entry-level position at a small firm in Reno. She had lost the house, the accounts, the constructed life. It was the first time she had ever started from nothing. I didn't know what she would build. That wasn't mine to follow. Eleanor was in Lakewood. 2 bedrooms, federal civil judgment, $1.2 million in penalties and unpaid taxes drawn from frozen assets. A small pension covering the monthly basics. No regular visitors. She had, from what Marcus told me, stopped contesting that particular silence. Thomas had been formally restored to the public record in January. Documents accounts the full legal existence of a man returned from disappearance. He had an apartment 12 blocks from this office. We had coffee twice a week. It was the easiest thing I had ever done. Sarah was in Basalt. Half-acre garden she had been planning for years. Sunday phone calls she answered on the first ring. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The only one I'd ever saved under no name. New case. Different mountains. Same order I looked at it. Typed back. Black. No sugar. The reply came in under 30 seconds. Thought so. Ryan Cole. Reassigned to a Mountain West Financial Crimes Task Force. Still methodical. Still operating on the quiet authority of someone who trusted the process because he had seen the process work. I put the phone down. 3 knocks at the office door. Come in. Thomas came in sideways, both hands holding paper cups from the corner place that had become fixed in both our weeks. He set one in front of me and kept the other and sat in the chair I had bought specifically because I expected him to use it. Busy? He asked. Never too busy, I said. He nodded. We looked out the window together. The Rockies were doing their clear day thing, close and sharp, entirely unbothered by anything that had happened beneath them. Do you think about it? He said. Aspen. I thought about the question honestly. I think about who I was there, I said. The woman who believed the life she'd built was real. A pause. I don't miss the life. I miss believing it was solid. Those are different things. Thomas looked at the mountains. Nodded once. We sat in the silence that exists between two people who have been through the same fire from different directions and no longer need to explain themselves. Comfortable? Specific to us. I turned back to the desk. The laptop showed a website in its final draft, clean design, simple header, a logo that had taken 3 weeks and 6 designers to get right. Whitfield Forensic Advisory. His name. My work. The 2 things they had tried hardest to take. The 2 things I had refused to release. I picked up my coffee. David had written in his journal that her father's trust was the only thing in her life that had never let her down. He had spent 3 months studying me before he said hello, learning the order, the routines, the loneliness. He had cataloged every system. He had been thorough. He had been patient. He had been, for 6 years, genuinely very good. And he had missed the most basic thing. The system he thought the weakness was never the weakness. I was. And I had never let myself down. People ask me what I learned from all of this. I learned that family betrayal doesn't always arrive with a warning. Sometimes the people who smile at your dinner table are the ones quietly counting what's on it. I learned that family revenge isn't loud. It isn't a dramatic speech. It's 4 years of quiet, precise work showing up every day when every day costs you something. Being the most prepared person in a room full of people who assumed you weren't paying attention. And I learned that God has a timing I don't always understand, but have stopped arguing with. The night I found that footage on Christmas Eve, I didn't feel saved. I felt destroyed. What I know now is that those 2 things are sometimes the exact same moment. Here is what I would tell you from someone who lived it: don't do what I did. Don't carry it alone for 4 years. Don't mistake silence for strength when what you need is one person you can trust with the truth. Family betrayal is survivable, but not in isolation. Find your Marcus. Find your Thomas. Then build the case. My personal opinion: family revenge that lasts isn't built on anger. It's built on evidence, on patience, on refusing to disappear when someone has designed your exit. The most dangerous thing you can do to a person who underestimated you is simply remain, rebuild. Put your father's name on the door and open for business. Because family betrayal only wins if you let it be the last chapter. And family revenge means writing every chapter after it on your own terms. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Leave a comment telling me which moment stayed with you longest. And if you want to be here when the next door opens, you know where to find me. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. The stories ahead contain fictional elements built for the purpose of storytelling and reflection. If this type of content isn't right for you, that's completely okay. Step away, find what serves you, and take good care of yourself. For everyone staying, I'll see you in the next one.
Alright, that's the story for today. Thanks for sticking around. I'll see you in the next one.
I'm freezing. I'm bleeding. Slowly fading away. But don't worry, I'm fine. The cold has settled in my heartbeat, like winter living in my veins. Every breath feels numb and fragile. Every smile just hides the pain. I'm breaking quietly in silence, falling slow without a sound. Yet I keep saying I'm okay, while my world burns to the ground. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. Maybe pain just learned to live here. Maybe sorrow feels like home. So I wear my wounds like armor and survive them all alone. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. If you ever see me smiling, no, it's just my last defense. 'Cause sometimes love means hiding how much you're suffering. No, I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. It's okay. Some days feel off, like I'm standing but still falling. A little pain, a little tired, and no one to tell it all to. There are days that feel unsteady, like I'm drifting out of place. Every step just feels so heavy, with a smile I have to fake. A little hurt I keep inside me, a little weight I always hide, and 1,000 quiet worries I've been holding deep inside. There's no one here to tell it to, they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. I keep walking through the silence like it's all I've ever known. Every crowded room reminds me how it feels to be alone. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. Maybe one day I'll be stronger, maybe I'll learn how to speak, but for now I keep it buried in the parts of me too weak. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you.